and the Environment Agency gave them permission on the basis of their report. Okay, now their report was bogus. Their report was a load of nonsense, okay, and it was easy to show that. But the Environment Agency didn't investigate it. They just tick-boxed it. They said, yeah, okay, off you go, no problem. So you have to ask why, or how, and who's responsible.
And do you want to just tell me a bit more about, I suppose, how do you usually, I suppose you or your organisation, how do you usually been engaging with the EA?
Well, we haven't for a long time because we've given up on it. I mean, we don't see any point wasting our time. Okay, that's the answer. We did it. We tried to engage with them long ago. I mean, remember, I've been at this for a long time, and I was engaging with them over Hinkley Point. I've engaged with them over Bradwell. I've engaged with them over all sorts of things, but I haven't really bothered with them for certainly 10 years. Really, I was involved with my colleague Richard Bramhall, who was working with the Welsh on blocking an application to dig out the mud from Hinkley Point in Somerset and dump it in Wales. You probably don't know this, but around about 2015, I think thereabouts. Anyway, you can find it on the internet. They needed to have a deep water channel into Hinkley Point to bring in all the reactor stuff from France. They're building this new reactor. Okay, now these things were very heavy. They had to come in on boats which because they were so heavy needed to have a lot of water under them, yeah, in order to float. So in order to bring the things in, they had to dredge the mud, which was just on the outside of Hinkley Point. They dig the mud out so that the boats could get in, right? But then the question is what to do with the mud. Now, the mud was contaminated, there's no doubt about that, because Hinkley's been running since 1966 or 70 or somewhere around then, so there's tons and tons of mud that's full of radioactivity, mainly uranium and plutonium. What to do with it? So the idea was to put it into boats and take it across to Wales, and then dump it just off the Welsh coast by Cardiff. That was the plan, and they applied to the Environment Agency for permission to do that. Environment Agency said, yeah, no problem. No problem. And then, of course, the Welsh got pissed off with this because for two reasons. First of all, they said, hey, look, we're Wales. Why should we have all this English contamination dumped on Wales? Is it because we're second-class citizens? Well, of course it was. Because the English people on the other side certainly didn't want it dumped on their side, you see. So this is a political issue. Nevertheless, the Environment Agency were involved in all of this, and they took the side of the applicants who wanted to dump the mud, and in the end they won. And then they went to court. I think there was all sorts of inquiries about it, and the Welsh politicians got involved and so on. And in the end, what happened is that they dumped the mud. They dumped the radioactive mud on the Cardiff Flats, and that stuff is a radioactive particulate. So it has little tiny microparticles of uranium and plutonium. And when the wind blows from the southwest, which it does, up the Severn Estuary, it produces waves. And these waves splash all over the mud on those stent flats, on the flats there where the mud has been dumped. And it picks these particles up and it blows them into Cardiff, right? Now in Cardiff there are lots of people, and they walk about the place inhaling these particles of uranium. These particles get into their lung, and it gets translocated from the lung into the tracheobronchial lymph nodes, and then they go more or less anywhere in the body. Particularly they go to the breast, they go to the lymphatic system, and they go to a lot of places which cause cancer. So you get an increased rate of breast cancer, increased rate of leukemia, and increased rate of lymphoma. And when we studied that in around about 2005, 2010, we found increased rates of all of these diseases all along the Severn Estuary as a result of all of the nuclear sites there. Because there's another nuclear power station up the Severn Estuary, and there's a Hinkley Point, and then there's Amersham International on the Cardiff side, which pumps all the stuff into the river, and it comes out into the estuary, and it's all been measured. You can measure it. And if you look at the tritium concentrations in the radioactivity in food and environment, you know those reports every year, they're good reports. And you look at them, you find that the concentration of tritium and carbon-14 all along those coasts is very high, and you find that cancer all along those coasts is very high as well. So we know all this stuff, but the Environment Agency do not bother to look into it at all themselves. They rely upon really simplistic models, and they're directed to do what they're directed to do by the government. And that's it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate kind of this is like must be really frustrating from your perspective. But we do have an agenda for this particular session. Sort of particularly, we just wanted to, I suppose, understand how kind of you perceive the EA and kind of experience in their role in terms of regulating.
I see them as a sort of dishonest buffer between preordained policy and the perception of the people. That's what I see them as. They're like they've got the most important job in England in this area. They are the actual sharp point in this war. It's a war between the people and their health. It's a war between public health, real public health, that's what it is, and those people who want to make money, the nuclear industry, the nuclear military complex, and the government. That's it. And in the middle of them is the poor Environment Agency. There they are. And what they've got to do is they've got to somehow administer it in such a way that they fool the people into thinking that they're actually doing a really good job. And the people then just think, no way, you're a bunch of crooks and we're not interested. We know we're dying, we know why we're dying, and we don't want to hear anything from you about why we're not dying because of some numbers that you drew out of a hat. That's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand that correctly, so you previously engaged with them, tried to become the advisor, and nowadays you don't really engage with them so much.
No, we've given up. I've given up. I mean, actually, most of the people have given up. In fact, there used to be quite a lot of anti-nuclear groups around the country who tried to sort of honestly engage with the Environment Agency very quickly. And they're clever people, they're not scientists. They're basically sociologists and political people, but they're not stupid. And they quickly realise that they're being fooled, that they go into a meeting and the meeting pretends to listen to what they say, a bit like you and me, really. And then they pretend to listen to what they say, and they put it all up in a PowerPoint and then put it in the toilet. That's basically what everybody thinks.
It's kind of like, is that kind of what you said of like people like you in general, like their perception of the EA?
Well, I think you can, if you needed like the most important person in this area, you're looking at him, all right? I know everything about what the Environment Agency does and what they represent and what they do and what they don't do. I mean, I've been around a long time. I'm 80 years old. I've been doing this stuff since I was, 30 years anyway, for sure.
Yeah.
And also, I'm the ex-Green Party Minister for Technology. This is the Green Party of England and Wales. So they chose me as the Shadow Minister of Technology long ago. So I understand the political spin. I understand the political aspects of all of this stuff. I'm basically a scientist, but I'm also politico. I understand how the world works and how it functions and what people do and all the rest of it. And so I hope that. Anyway, so that's why I'm here, really, because I want to try and persuade whoever it is that you report to, and I'm hoping that this will all be recorded in such a way that they can think, oh, all right, so this is what Busby thinks. And of course, what they do about it, of course, they don't get much choice. I feel sorry for them. When I was talking to those guys at the meeting, that's why I wanted to go to the meeting. I wanted to see what sort of human beings were there to operate this system, because to operate this system you have to have a particular kind of conscience. You have to have a kind of way in which you can deal with the fact that you know that what you're doing is wrong, but you do it because it's a job, and the job pays you money, and you can you can pay your mortgage and everybody's happy and you have a nice car and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, I believe that everybody in their minds, that everybody in their minds has some little machine that registers what they're doing. And it sort of says, look, this is wrong, what you're doing is wrong. And you say, oh no, it's not wrong, of course, if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it, and all this stuff, And so I wanted to see the people, and I must say, I looked at those people and I thought, what a load of weaklings. That's the problem, you've got to be tough to do this. I mean, I'm tough, I've got no money, I'm so poor, you cannot imagine. I live on an old age pension, of what is it, £850 a month. That's what I live on. That's it. Okay, and I used to make a bit of money doing court cases. I used to win court cases in America. I'd go into court and they would back off immediately. They would just pay up, okay? Because they knew they were wrong. In the courts of nuclear industry, you take them into court and they've had it. That's it. Not in England. In England, you've got judges and the judges will just squash it. But in America, you get juries and you win.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry for interrupting you. I just want to make sure, because I got lots of questions I'd like to, hear your feedback about.
Yeah, go on.
I just want to make sure we still wrap up on time. So I can see that, like, when you previously filled in this survey, that you have filled in twice the survey, right? And some of the answers seem to have changed in your second entry of this nuclear stakeholder survey. Just wanted to check, was that something kind of that still?
I don't remember what I wrote. So I mean, you have to ask me specific questions about that.
Yeah. So, for example, I can see some of the things you changed were sort of kind of how I can see that you put mostly do not trust with EA to deliver nuclear responsibilities.
Yeah.
And also kind of in terms of rates of how efficient they were. I think first time you put tend to disagree, and second time you put neutral. In terms of innovative, first time you put neutral, second time you put strongly disagree. I suppose I'm just interested here about,
Yeah, okay, no, I understand where you're going, I think. Anyway, you can tell me if I don't. The problem is this, that I think that the people who work for the Environment Agency, by and large, are idiots, all right? That is to say that, no, idiots is not fair. That's very unfair. They are technicians. They apply rules. So there's a set of rules, which is the rules supplied by the International Commission on Radiological Protection. So when I say they're a bunch of crooks, I don't really mean that. I think the individual people there are not terribly. They're not scientists. One, not really. They're not scientists in the sense of being questioning. Okay, so now to my mind, a scientist should question things. So if somebody says, "Oh well, that duck over there is red and black," the scientist should look and see, because he might turn out to be blue and yellow. But the point is that in this case they don't do that. They don't question any of the rules that they have to apply to the regulations that they don't usually do that. They have to administer regulations, and there's a big list of regulations, and they sort of tick the boxes. So when I say that they're a bunch of crooks, I don't really mean that. I mean that the organisation itself, it may well be well-meaning. It may think that it's protecting people from all of this stuff, but actually that it's not. And that's the problem. There's a kind of tension there, which has to do with the ability of the people who are organising the system. Does that help?
Appreciate that. And I suppose it's interesting to understand what would your expectation be like? So far it sounds absolutely that they have not been doing a great job. What would you expect to see, like, if they were to perform well?
Yes. What I would expect them to do is I would expect them to recommend to the government that they have to shut down all the nuclear sites. And no question about that. The point is that the nuclear sites are killing people. I mean, I have just finished writing the European Committee on Radiation Risk report for 2026. It's 260 pages, and that's going to be published in the next month. It'll be on the internet. It's going to be published as a discussion document, so people can write in and they can say, look, this is a load of nonsense and you're wrong here, and what about that, and so forth, And the Environment Agency is welcome to do that. I invited long ago we had a big conference in Greek, the ECR did, European Committee on Radiation Risk. We had a conference in Greece in 2009, and we invited the Environment Agency. We invited the National Radiological Protection Board, who at that time were more or less part of the same outfit. and who are now Public Health in England, and who are the people that the Environment Agency go to for advice when they meet people like me, and they didn't come. They refused to come. We invited the German radiological, the BFS, the Bundesstag für Strahlenschutz. We invited those people. We invited the French. We invited the Swedish. We invited ICRP. Nobody came. And afterwards I had a meeting in Stockholm with the secretary of the ICRP, secretary of the International Commission on Radiological Protection. We got him along to the University of Stockholm, and we had a discussion. It's on the, you can see it. It was videoed by Dieter Rietemar, and it's up on YouTube. And you can see me talking to the guy who's the point source of the ICRP, and he admitted in that interview that it was a load of rubbish. That it was wrong. That they could be out by a factor of 1,000. He admitted that on camera, right? So the question is, what do we do? You know, how do we take this forward? I was rather hoping that if I said all these things to you and they were recorded and you could see me sort of here as a real person, you know, saying this stuff, that it would go forward in such a way that there might be a meeting with all of these people, you know, whether they're cowards or whether they're bad guys or whether they're good guys, you know, and they would all sit in a room and look at it, and then they would afterwards discuss it and say, look, this guy, look, he's obviously mad, look at him, you know. Or they could say, well, what is he saying about, you know, I mean, he's saying that there's lots of contamination. Oh, well, that's not a problem because he's a nutcase, and so forth. But it might lead to something real. Because what we've got at the moment is something that is not real. We're living in a sort of theatre fantasy land about future nuclear. And so you ask me what I would suggest that they do, is they would start by looking at all of the evidence that is not given by the International Commission on Radiological Protection and use it in order to consider whether it's justified continuing to contaminate the environment when it's killing all these people. That's what I would expect them to do.
Yeah, definitely. We're making sure to record that and do that back to the EA. Now we've just got a limited amount of time. I just want to focus my final couple of questions on your experience of communications with the EA.
My experience of what? Communication. Yeah, sure, yeah. No, they're usually quite good. They're quite good. You know, they're great at communication, okay? But the problem is what they say. That's the problem. I mean, if you write to them and you say, look here, you know, there's lots of new, yeah.
Are working well for you? What's not so well for you? Like, which are the aspects you think they're quite good at?
The Environment Agency are quite careful. They're quite careful to communicate with people who ask them questions and make points, all right? The problem is that what they say... Is it the language, or, like, that's working well, or is it the content you're not happy with? What aspects of the communication? Oh yeah, well, what I'm not happy with is that they write nonsense. That's what I'm happy with. They fob you off. This is basically like this is pretty much like society at the moment, you know, and has been for a long time. I mean, you can write to your MP, for example. You can write to the National Radiological Protection Board. You can write to the EA, you know, and they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll get back to you on that one. And they get back to you with some response which is just wrong, which is just nonsense, you know, which is just, or worse than that, it's just not an answer. It's a kind of dismissal of the basic question that you're asking.
So it sounds like the language, the accessibility is okay, like you're saying, they're doing quite well, but the content is false, it's wrong.
That's right. They are operating a dangerously wrong system, and they're doing it very well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
let me give you, and here's another example. I'll quickly do this.
Okay.
Is that the radioactivity in food and environment, every year they measure all sorts of radioactivity at every nuclear site in England, right? And all over the place. And they produce a beautiful glossy book with all these graphs and pictures and numbers and all the rest of it. And every time they wrote to me, because I'm on their list, they say, what do you want us to do? What extra thing would be useful? And every time I write, I say, you need to measure uranium. And they never do. And they do need to measure uranium, because uranium particles are enormously complicated causes No, they're enormous causes of cancer in areas where they are in the sea, where they're contaminating the mud banks, you know, because they do what I was saying to you before. They come up, you get sea to land transfer, you get waves, and they electrostatically charge the particles. They go up in the air, they get blown inshore, and they produce a sea coast effect on cancer all along the west coast of England. But the Environment Agency doesn't measure them, doesn't measure the concentrations of uranium in the sediment. No.
Yeah, so sounds like it's that frustration where you kind of get in touch but never getting a reply.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, they pretend. This is the point. It's like in Czechoslovakia and in the Soviet Union, they used to say, "We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us." Okay, you understand? We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. Well, what the Environment Agency does is it pretends to be the Environment Agency. It pretends to look after people. And it doesn't do that. It looks after the industry.
How I suppose overall, how easy or difficult is it to get in touch with EA, to speak to someone?
Just pick up the phone or write to them. But I can't be bothered to do it, you see, because it doesn't go anywhere and it just wastes my time. The way I decided to deal with this long ago was that it's a waste of time coming up against these people. It's just waste of energy. What you have to do is go round them. So in other words, I didn't want to talk to. We didn't want to fight the environment, the ICRP. We didn't want to fight the Environment Agency. We wanted to make our own Environment Agency, make our own ICRP, and produce our own reports. And then the people ultimately decide. Because the more and more people die of cancer, the more and more they'll realise what's really going on, and they should do something. But maybe not. But they ought to.
I suppose in terms of the quality of the information you receive from EA, how would you rate them on that?
The quality of information is good, but it's wrong. Or it's inadequate. Okay? So in other words, when they tell you that the concentration of cesium, they say the concentration of cesium-137 in the soil near Hinkley Point is 2.6 becquerels per kilogram, you think, okay, so what? Because they don't tell you they don't actually tell you what is important to know. What is important to know is if you live near a nuclear site, you're going to die of cancer more likely than if you don't.
Yeah, makes sense. I suppose if there's, obviously, it's for you, if there's one thing you could change about how the communicate.
How they communicate? Right, I seem to. We've lost the signal.
Sorry.
Say that again. That we had an unstable moment then. Yes.
Yeah. I suppose
so if there was one thing I could change about the way in which the Environment Agency communicated, I would say they should answer the questions that they're asked and not different questions. And they should look at, and the most important thing they should do is they should look at other risk models. They should not accept the ICRP. The ICRP is not a democratically elected operation. It's a nuclear industry operation, and it's dishonest, and always has been. It's been operating dishonestly since 1952, and as a result of its advice, probably 500 million people have died of cancer, and that can be proved. I think we're losing the connection now.